The 42nd floor of TechCore's San Francisco headquarters gleamed with the cold perfection of brushed steel and glass, where Brandon Liu's corner office overlooked the Bay Bridge like a throne room surveying conquered territory. At 34, he'd built the fifth largest AI company in Silicon Valley through ruthless intelligence and an even more ruthless ego. His face gracing the covers of Wired and Fast Company with the same practiced smirk he wore now as he dismissed yet another intern suggestion without looking up from his phone. The venture capital world had crowned him the Asian Zuckerberg, a title that fed his arrogance while his actual product, TechCore's flagship AI assistant, was hemorrhaging users to competitors he publicly mocked on Twitter. His girlfriend Stephanie Chin sat across from him in a cream Chanel suit, her own VC firm's portfolio thick with companies that feared her sharp tongue more than they valued her capital. And she laughed as Brandon snapped his fingers at the intern hovering near the door. "Coffee, Maya. And this time, don't forget I take oat milk, not almond. How many times do I need to tell you?" Maya Patel stood in the doorway of Brandon's office, wearing a rumpled Target blazer over a faded Stanford t-shirt, her long black hair pulled into a messy bun that spoke of another sleepless night in the intern room. She'd been at TechCore for 3 months now, and every day brought the same humiliation. Fetching dry cleaning, organizing Brandon's calendar, running the Blue Bottle coffee 6 blocks away because he didn't trust the office espresso machine. Her Stanford computer science PhD diploma gathered dust in her rented room in Oakland, earned at 24 after 3 years of relentless research that her advisor had stolen without a second thought, leaving her with nothing but patents she couldn't afford to defend and an immigrant family who'd sacrificed everything for her American education. The internship was supposed to be her way back into the industry, a chance to prove her revolutionary machine learning algorithm could change everything. But instead, she spent her days watching Brandon's ego inflate while her code sat untouched on her personal laptop. She nodded silently at his coffee order, her fingers tightening around the notebook where she'd sketched out the solution to TechCore's failing AI architecture during her lunch break. 3 days later, TechCore stock would plummet $500 million in 30 minutes during a catastrophic live demo at TechCrunch Disrupt, and Brandon Liu's empire would teeter on the edge of complete collapse. Stephanie would reveal her true nature as she tried to claim ownership of Maya's revolutionary code, setting off a chain of events that would expose corporate espionage, destroy reputations, and force Brandon to confront the brilliant woman he'd treated like furniture. The intern room's fluorescent lights would illuminate late-night coding sessions that turned into something neither of them expected, and the algorithm Maya had hidden away would reshape not just TechCore, but the entire artificial intelligence industry. But for now, Maya just took the coffee order and left, her worn sneakers silent on the polished marble floors, while Brandon returned his phone without noticing the genius he'd just dismissed. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Brandon Liu's morning began at 5:30 a.m. in his Pacific Heights penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Golden Gate Bridge, and his Peloton instructor shouted motivational platitudes through expensive speakers. His routine was engineered for maximum efficiency: cold shower, bulletproof coffee, 30-minute scanning tech blogs for mentions of TechCore, all executed with a precision that had built his $2 billion company from a Stanford dorm room idea. The penthouse itself was a monument to minimalist wealth. Eames chairs, a single Rothko painting, kitchen appliances that cost more than most cars but rarely touched because he ordered from Caviar 3 times a day. He pulled on a black Zegna suit that Stephanie had picked out, checked his reflection with the casual vanity of someone who'd been called handsome since birth, and headed out the door without noticing the emptiness that had settled into his chest like fog rolling through the bay. The Tesla drive to the office took 45 minutes through San Francisco traffic, time Brandon spent on conference calls where he interrupted engineers mid-sentence and made decisions that affected hundreds of lives without pausing for breath. His assistant had already organized his day into 15-minute blocks: investor calls, product reviews, a lunch meeting with the senator's chief of staff who wanted to discuss AI regulation. TechCore occupied 7 floors of a building in Soma, each level decorated with motivational posters about disruption and innovation that employees stopped seeing after their first week. Brandon strode through the lobby without acknowledging the security guard or the handful of early arrival engineers who scattered like pigeons when he approached, his reputation for sudden firings well-earned and frequently deployed. His executive team meeting started at 8 a.m. sharp. 7 vice presidents arranged around the conference table like subject court, and Brandon spent the first 10 minutes tearing apart their quarterly projections with the glee of a child destroying sandcastles. "We're bleeding users to Microsoft and Google," he said, stabbing a finger at the presentation on the screen. "Our AI assistant can't understand basic context. Our machine learning models are 2 years behind competition. And you people want to tell me everything's fine?" The chief technology officer, a nervous Stanford graduate who'd once been Brandon's friend, started to explain the technical challenges they face, but Brandon cut him off with a wave of his hand. His phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Don't forget INTERN gets your dry cleaning today. She looked pathetic fetching coffee yesterday, lol." Brandon smirked at the message and looked up at his team, his dark eyes scanning the room with the predatory awareness of someone who viewed every interaction as a power play. "TechCrunch Disrupt is in 2 weeks, he said, his voice dropping into the dangerous quiet that preceded his worst outbursts. "We're demoing the new AI assistant live on stage, in front of every investor and reporter who matters in this industry. If this product doesn't blow everyone away, we lose everything. The next funding round, our market position, my reputation." The CTO's face went pale because everyone in that room knew the product wasn't ready, that the core algorithm still failed basic tests, that they were basically planning to fake a demo with pre-scripted responses and pray nobody noticed. But nobody said anything because speaking truth to Brandon Liu was career suicide. So they all nodded and promised miracles while Brandon checked his watch and wondered if he had time to make Stephanie's morning Pilates class. He didn't think about the intern at all until noon, when his assistant reminded him that Maya was waiting outside with his lunch from Silva and the Brunello Cucinelli shirts he'd ordered from Neiman Marcus. Brandon barely glanced at her as she entered, this slight Indian girl in her early 20s who moved to his office like she was trying not to take up space, setting down the food and garment bags with careful precision. "The shirts are wrong," he said without checking, enjoying the flash of confusion in her eyes. "I ordered blue. These are navy. Take them back." Maya opened her mouth like she might protest, then closed it and picked up the bags, and Brandon felt a small, mean satisfaction at her obedience. Wait and see was a laptop bag slung over her shoulder, or the lines of code visible on her screen when she turned to leave, or the solution to his company's existential crisis that she carried into his office and carried back out without him noticing once. Stephanie arrived at 1 p.m. in her usual cloud of Chanel No. 5 and barely concealed disdain for everyone who made less than 7 figures annually, her heels clicking against the marble floors like a countdown to judgment. She kissed Brandon without warmth and launched into a complaint about portfolio company founders who didn't understand term sheets, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your intern looked like a homeless person in the lobby," she said, settling into the Eames chair across from his desk. "Does she own anything that isn't from Target?" Brandon laughed and pulled up a photo on his phone. Maya looking confused while holding 5 different coffee orders outside Blue Bottle, her Stanford shirt visible beneath an oversized cardigan. "She's got a bachelor's from somewhere, I think. Useful for grunt work." They spent the next hour reviewing TechCore's financials, and Stephanie mentioned casually that her firm was considering a competing investment in an AI startup that had better technology, watching Brandon's jaw tighten with the satisfaction of someone who knew exactly where to stick the knife. The afternoon dissolved into more meetings, more calls, more emails that demanded immediate responses, while giving nothing in return. And Brandon left the office at 7 p.m. feeling a particular emptiness that came from spending 12 hours wielding power without purpose. His driver navigated back through the city to Pacific Heights, where his penthouse waited with its expensive furniture and expensive art and complete absence of anything resembling human warmth. Stephanie had canceled dinner plans to fly to Los Angeles for a pitch meeting, so Brandon ordered sushi from his favorite omakase place and ate alone while scrolling through Twitter, watching his own verified account proclaim his genius to 500,000 followers who believed the mythology he'd so carefully constructed. He didn't think about Maya Patel at all, didn't wonder about the girl who'd spent 3 months running his errands without complaint, didn't notice the brilliant mind he dismissed as furniture. He fell asleep watching CNBC review tech stocks. TechCore's ticker down another 3% as investors worried about competition and dreamed about nothing at all. The penthouse security cameras recorded his still form on the leather couch, the blue light of financial news washing over his face, a 34-year-old billionaire who had everything except the one thing that would save him. Outside, somewhere in Oakland, Maya Patel was still awake, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard as she refined the algorithm that would either redeem her stolen past or disappear into obscurity, depending on choices she hadn't made yet. The city lights stretched between them like a gap Brandon didn't know existed, while the countdown to TechCrunch Disrupt ticked forward one day at a time. Maya Patel's alarm went off at 5 a.m. in her Oakland studio apartment, the kind of place where you could touch three walls without moving, and the neighbors' arguments came to the ceiling like they were happening in your own room. She'd lived here for 8 months, ever since her Stanford stipend ended, and her advisor, Professor James Morrison, published her neural network research under his own name, launching a consulting career while she borrowed money from her parents to make rent. The apartment's only decoration was a framed photograph of her family, her father in a Sacramento gas station uniform, her mother in surgical scrubs from the nursing home where she worked night shifts, and Maya's younger brother, Rahul, who'd given up his college fund so she could afford Stanford's application fees. She showered in the rust-stained bathroom and pulled on the same Target blazer she'd worn yesterday, her wardrobe consisting of 5 professional outfits purchased from clearance racks and supplemented with Stanford T-shirts her advisor had given her before stealing 3 years of her work. The BART ride from MacArthur Station to Montgomery took 45 minutes, time Maya spent reviewing code on her laptop while standing the packed train, because sitting meant risking theft in the morning commute chaos. Her PhD dissertation sat in her Google Drive, 347 pages of revolutionary machine learning architecture that could process natural language with 98% accuracy, a full generation ahead of anything currently deployed in commercial products. Professor Morrison had taken her research, simplified it just enough to avoid direct plagiarism claims, and published it through Stanford's prestigious AI lab with himself as primary author, and Maya buried in the acknowledgments section. She consulted 3 lawyers who all said the same thing. Academic theft was nearly impossible to prosecute, especially when you were a broke immigrant kid going against a tenured professor with 15 patents and connections throughout Silicon Valley. So she'd taken the TechCore internship because the listing mentioned AI development, hoping someone would notice her skills. Instead, she spent 3 months as Brandon Liu's personal assistant, watching him treat brilliant engineers like disposable labor while his girlfriend mocked their fashion choices from her perch in venture capital heaven. Maya had seen TechCore's actual AI architecture during her first week. She needed to access the GitHub repository to update Brandon's calendar integration, and realized immediately that the company's entire product was built on fundamentally broken assumptions. The machine learning models couldn't handle context switching. The natural language processing relied on outdated transformer architectures, and the whole system would collapse under any real-world stress testing. She'd started writing her own solution that night in the intern room, working until 3 a.m. while the cleaning crew vacuumed around her, building a neural network that could process conversational context with unprecedented efficiency. Maya arrived at TechCore at 7:30 a.m., early enough to avoid Brandon's morning wrath, but late enough that the office coffee was already cold and bitter, which was fitting because that's how she felt about her life most days. The intern room was a windowless space on the 3rd floor where 12 interns shared desks and competed for the attention of executives who'd already decided their fates based on which schools they'd attended and whose parents they knew. She shared desk space with Tyler from Yale, who spent his days creating PowerPoint presentations nobody read, and Jessica from Princeton, who'd already secured a post-internship offer because her father golfed with the CFO. They greeted Maya with a kind of polite distance reserved for people who clearly didn't belong in their social circle, and she booted up her laptop while trying not to think about how Professor Morrison was probably having breakfast at Buck's in Woodside right now, taking meetings with venture capitalists who assumed he'd invented the AI breakthrough that was really Maya's work. Brandon's morning text came at 8:15 a.m. Coffee. Blue bottle. Oat milk. Also pick up my car from detail shop on Brandon. Keys with reception. Maya closed her laptop, closing the window where she'd been optimizing her algorithm's processing speed, and headed out into the San Francisco morning. The walk to Blue Bottle took 20 minutes because the coffee shop Brandon demanded was 6 blocks away, and Maya used the time to mentally review her code architecture while dodging tech bros on electric scooters and tourists taking selfies with the Bay Bridge. The barista knew Brandon's order by heart and added a sympathetic smile when Maya pulled out the company card, probably recognizing her as the intern who came 3 times a day looking progressively more exhausted. The car detail shop made her show ID twice and check with TechCore before releasing Brandon's Tesla, which smelled like new leather and cost more than her parents had earned in 5 years of combined work. She delivered everything to Brandon's office at 9 a.m. sharp, where he was in a meeting with his executive team, and didn't look up from his presentation about TechCrunch Disrupt. Maya set the coffee on his desk and turned to leave, but Stephanie's voice stopped her. "Maya, right? That blazer is from Target, isn't it? I can always tell." The executives went silent, and Maya felt her face burn with humiliation, while Stephanie examined her like she was a specimen under glass. "Brandon tells me you went to Stanford," Stephanie continued, her tone suggesting this was unlikely. "What did you study?" Maya's voice came out steady despite her racing heart. "Computer science, Ph.D. I specialize in neural network architecture and natural language processing." Stephanie laughed, and said, "Well, that's nice, but someone needs to get Brandon's coffee, and the PhD students are all too busy doing real work." Brandon didn't defend her, didn't even acknowledge the interaction beyond a slight smirk as he returned to his presentation about the TechCrunch demo. Maya left the office with her hands shaking, rode the elevator down 3 floors, and sat in the intern room bathroom for 10 minutes trying to remember why she thought this would be different from every other place that had dismissed her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Your mother's hours got cut again. Can you send $500 this month?" She had $238 in her checking account and wouldn't get paid for another week. So she texted back, of course, and added it to the mental list of debts she'd someday have to repay. Then she washed her face, returned to her desk, and opened her laptop where her algorithm waited. The code that could save TechCore's failing product and prove she wasn't just a coffee girl everyone assumed she was. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm of humiliation. Fetching lunch from Suvla, lamb pita for Brandon, salmon salad for Stephanie. Organizing Brandon's calendar when his assistant was at a dental appointment. Sitting through an intern lecture about startup culture delivered by someone 5 years younger than Maya who'd never written a line of code in his life. Tyler whispered that Brandon was planning to fire half the intern class next week based on performance reviews that were really just popularity contests, and Jessica mentioned she'd already been invited to Brandon's lake house in Tahoe next month, which everyone knew was where the real hiring decisions got made. Maya nodded and smiled and pretended none of it mattered, while her algorithm ran in the background of her laptop, processing test data and proving over and over that it worked, that she'd solved the impossible problem TechCore's entire engineering team couldn't crack. At 6 p.m., when most of the office had cleared out for happy hour at the bar south of Market Street, Maya stayed in the intern room and pulled up TechCore's public API documentation. She spent 2 hours building a proof-of-concept demo of her algorithm integrated with TechCore's existing user interface, just to see if her theory was correct. The results made her hands shake. Her neural network processed conversational context 300% faster than TechCore's current system, understood nuance and sarcasm that confused commercial AI assistants, and handled context switching without losing thread, exactly the features Brandon's product desperately needed. She saved everything to her personal Google Drive, backed it up to a USB drive she kept in her bag, and closed her laptop just as the cleaning crew arrived. The BART ride home was packed with tech workers scrolling through phones and talking about IPO stock options and vacation homes in Carmel, while Maya stood by the doors and wondered what it felt like to be so secure in your place in the world. Her studio apartment greeted her with its usual mix of traffic noise and cooking smells from neighboring units, and she made ramen on a hot plate because her budget didn't allow for restaurants unless you count a free lunchroom at TechCore. She ate standing up while reviewing her algorithm's test results on her laptop, the screen's glow illuminating her face in the dark apartment because she was trying to save money on electricity. Somewhere in Pacific Heights, Brandon Liu was probably at some restaurant that required reservations months in advance, drinking wine that cost more than her monthly rent. completely unaware that the intern he'd humiliated that morning had built the solution to his biggest problem. TechCrunch disrupted the Senate on San Francisco like an invasion of overconfident tech bros and anxious startup founders, taking over Moscow and Center with its main stage, exhibition hall, and endless networking opportunities where people exchanged business cards and made promises they wouldn't keep. Brandon Liu arrived in his Tesla, wearing a black Steve Jobs-style turtleneck he'd spent $500 on at Nordstrom, his hair styled with just enough calculated messiness to look approachable on camera. TechCore's demo was scheduled for 2 p.m. on the main stage, prime time for maximum press coverage and investor attention, and Brandon had spent the past week rehearsing his presentation until every pause and hand gesture looked spontaneous. The plan was simple. Showcase TechCore's new AI assistant with a live demonstration of conversational fluency, answer a few questions from a moderator, and watch the stock price surge as investors realized they'd underestimated his vision. The green room backstage was crowded with other presenters nervously reviewing slides, but Brandon sat alone in the corner scrolling through Twitter mentions of himself while Stephanie adjusted his collar and dispensed advice. "Remember to mention the $800 million in committed capital," she said, her voice low enough that nearby founders couldn't hear. "And when they ask about competition, be dismissive but not arrogant, confident, not cocky." Brandon nodded without really listening, his mind already on the stage and the headlines he'd generate. TechCore redefines AI with revolutionary demo. His phone buzzed with updates from the CTO, who was backstage with 5 engineers monitoring the demo setup. The carefully scripted responses, the preloaded context, the backup systems in case something went wrong. Nothing would go wrong. Brandon had made that absolutely clear, even if it meant the demo wasn't quite as live as the audience would believe. At TechCore headquarters 3 miles away, Maya Patel sat at her desk in the intern room, watching the TechCrunch disrupt live stream on her laptop, her stomach twisting with anxiety as Brandon's presentation slot approached. She'd seen the demo in rehearsals, had been forced to sit through them while fetching water bottles and adjusting lighting, and recognized immediately that the revolutionary AI assistant was just smoke and mirrors hiding TechCore's fundamental technical failures. The other interns had been dismissed for the day because management didn't want them wandering around during the demo, but Maya had stayed behind claiming she needed to finish a project. And now she sat alone in the fluorescent-lit room, watching Brandon's confident face fill her screen. Her own laptop was open beside her with her algorithm running, the code she perfected over 3 months of late nights, and for a wild moment she imagined what would happen if she contacted someone at TechCrunch to tell them the truth. The demo began at 2 p.m. exactly as scheduled, Brandon striding onto the main stage to applause and camera flashes, while Stephanie watched from the VIP section with her usual expression of bored superiority. "Good afternoon," Brandon said, his voice amplified through Moscow and Center's sound system to reach the 3,000 attendees and the thousands more watching via livestream. "Today I'm going to show you the future of artificial intelligence, an AI assistant that doesn't just answer questions, but actually understands human conversation." The audience leaned forward with interest. Investors pulled out phones to check TechCore's stock price, and Maya watched from her desk as the elaborate theater began. Brandon gestured to the giant screen behind him where the TechCore interface appeared, clean and minimalist, and asked his first question. "What's the weather like in San Francisco today?" The AI assistant responded perfectly, because it had been pre-programmed with weather data pulled that morning, and Brandon smiled like a magician who just pulled a rabbit from a hat. He moved through the scripted sequence. Questions about restaurants, news headlines, stock prices, each answer delivered with the seamless confidence that came from careful preparation rather than actual AI capability. The audience murmured appreciation, and reporters typed notes in the phones, while Brandon's confidence grew with each successful exchange. Then, 13 minutes into the demo, he decided to go off-script because he was Brandon Liu and rules were for other people. "Let me ask something more complex," he said, leaning casually against the podium. "Can you summarize the main argument of the article about climate change I read this morning?" The AI assistant paused for exactly 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than it should have, and then the screen flickered. The audience shifted uncomfortably, and Brandon's smile tightened slightly, but he repeated the question with more confidence, assuming the system just needed a moment to process. The screen flickered again, and this time an error message appeared. Context_switch_failure. Unable to process conversational reference. A nervous laugh rippled through the audience, and Brandon felt sweat start under his expensive turtleneck. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. The system was supposed to be foolproof. Backstage, the CTO was frantically typing on a laptop, while engineers crowded around him, their faces pale with panic as they realized the entire demo architecture was collapsing. Brandon tried to recover by asking a simple question, but the AI assistant was now completely unresponsive, the screen showing loading circles that spun endlessly without producing results. The audience's nervous laughter turned to murmurs of confusion, and reporters in the front row started typing with more urgency, sensing the story had shifted from TechCore's triumph to TechCore's disaster. Stephanie's face had gone rigid in the VIP section, her phone already out to manage damage control, while Brandon stood on stage watching his reputation crumble in real time. The AI assistant suddenly rebooted itself and started responding to questions he hadn't asked, pulling up random information about cryptocurrency prices and local restaurant reviews in a digital word salad that made no sense. 3,000 people watched in fascinated horror as Brandon Liu's revolutionary AI demonstrated exactly how far behind TechCore really was compared to its competitors. The moderator finally interrupted at the 18-minute mark, suggesting they move on to questions while technical staff sorted out the minor glitch. But everyone in that room knew this wasn't minor. Brandon left the stage to scattered, polite applause that felt like a funeral dirge, his face carefully neutral while everything inside him screamed. By the time he reached the green room, TechCore stock had dropped 7% and was still falling, his phone exploding with texts from investors and board members demanding explanations. Stephanie found him 20 minutes later sitting alone with his head in his hands, the first genuine emotion Maya would have recognized if she'd been there to see it. "That was a complete disaster," Stephanie said without sympathy. "We need to figure out who's responsible for this, and we need to fire them publicly." Meanwhile, in TechCore's intern room, Maya had watched the entire catastrophe unfold with a mix of horror and vindication, her fingers automatically pulling up her own algorithm to compare what Brandon's AI had failed to do versus what her code could handle easily. She'd known the demo would fail eventually. The architecture couldn't support what Brandon had promised, but watching it implode publicly still felt surreal. Her laptop showed her own AI assistant processing the same complex questions Brandon had asked, handling them flawlessly because her neural network understood conversational context in ways TechCore's outdated system never could. She closed the live stream and stared at her own code, and for the first time in 3 months, Maya Patel made a decision that would change everything. She was going to tell Brandon Liu the truth. Brandon returned to TechCore headquarters at 5 p.m. to find the office in chaos. Engineers running between conference rooms, executives huddled in whispered conversations, and his assistant fielding calls from reporters asking for comments on what Twitter was already calling the worst tech demo since Theranos. He stormed into his office and slammed the door, ignoring Stephanie's text about crisis management strategy, and pulled up the stock chart on his computer. TechCore had lost $500 million in market capitalization in less than 3 hours. His phone showed 47 missed calls from board members, investors, and the PR firm he paid $50,000 monthly to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. The CTO appeared in his doorway looking like he hadn't slept in weeks, ready to take blame for the technical failure. But Brandon dismissed it with a wave because he didn't want explanations. He wanted solutions nobody seemed capable of providing. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. via video conference, and Brandon spent the intervening hour reviewing the post-mortem analysis his engineering team had prepared. The demo failure wasn't a simple glitch. It was a fundamental collapse of TechCore's core AI architecture that exposed how far behind they really were compared to competitors like Google and Microsoft. Fixing it would require rebuilding the entire system from scratch, which would take months they didn't have and burn through capital that investors were already threatening to withhold. Stephanie arrived at 6:30 p.m. with coffee from Phil's and her usual efficiency, laying out a crisis plan that involved firing the CTO, blaming the disaster on contractor error, and pivoting the company toward a different product line. Brandon listened while staring out his office windows at the San Francisco skyline, feeling the emptiness that had been building in his chest finally crystallize into something he could name: fear. The knock on his door came at 6:45 p.m., quiet and hesitant, and Brandon assumed it was another engineer ready to apologize or make excuses. "Go away," he said without turning from the window. But the door opened anyway, and a familiar voice said, "Mr. Liu, I need to show you something." He turned to find Maya Patel standing in his office doorway, clutching her laptop against her chest, her target blazer wrinkled from a long day, and her eyes showing the kind of determination that came from people who'd already lost everything. "Maya, this is really not the time," Brandon said, his voice sharp with exhaustion and anger. "Whatever intern project you want to show me can wait until we're not in the middle of a complete disaster." But Maya didn't leave. She took 3 steps into his office and set her laptop on his desk with hands that only shook slightly. "Don't sign anything Stephanie give you tonight," Maya said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "And don't fire your engineering team. The demo failure wasn't their fault. Your entire AI architecture is fundamentally broken." Brandon felt anger flash through his exhaustion, and he opened his mouth to call security. But something in Maya's expression stopped him. "I've been watching Tech Core System for 3 months, she continued, pulling up code on her laptop screen. "Your machine learning models can't handle conversational context switching because they're built on outdated transformer architectures that Google abandoned 2 years ago. Every question in your demo was feeding into a system that was designed to fail under real-world stress." Brandon looked at her laptop screen and saw lines of code he didn't fully understand, but Stephanie appeared in the doorway at that moment, and her voice cut through the room like ice. "Maya, what are you doing in here?" Stephanie said, her tone suggesting the intern had committed a crime by entering without permission. "Mr. Liu has an important board meeting in 10 minutes and doesn't need to waste time with whatever this is." But Brandon held up his hand because something Maya had said was rattling around in his brain. Something about context switching that matched exactly what the postmortem analysis had identified. "Wait," he said, still looking at Maya's laptop screen. "You said our architecture is fundamentally broken. How would you know that?" Maya met his eyes directly for the first time since she'd started the internship, and her voice carried 3 months of dismissed brilliance. "Because I built a solution. I wrote a neural network that fixes every problem your demo exposed, and I can prove it works." The office went completely silent, and Stephanie's expression shifted from annoyance to calculation, while Brandon felt like the ground had tilted beneath him. "You built what?" he said, his exhaustion forgotten as he pulled Maya's laptop closer to examine the code. "Show me." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up her algorithm's architecture and running a live demonstration that processed the exact same questions Brandon had asked during his failed demo. Her AI assistant handled them flawlessly, understanding conversational context, switching between topics seamlessly, providing nuanced responses that showed actual comprehension rather than pattern matching. Brandon watched in stunned silence as the intern he dismissed for 3 months demonstrated an AI capability that was literally years ahead of anything TechCore had developed. "How long have you had this?" he demanded, his mind already racing through implications. 3 months. Maya said quietly. "I started building it my first week here, when I saw your code base. I've been working on it every night in the intern room." Brandon pulled up a chair and started asking technical questions about processing speed, training data requirements, scaling limitations, and Maya answered each one with precision that proved she wasn't just showing him someone else's work. Stephanie moved closer to examine the laptop screen, her expression shifting from skepticism to greedy interest as she realized what she was seeing. "This is impressive," Stephanie said, her voice sugary in a way that made Maya's instinct scream danger. "Did you develop this using TechCore's resources? Because if you use company computers or time, then technically." But Brandon cut her off with a sharp gesture because he'd just seen something in Maya's code comments that made his blood run cold. The comment read, "Context-switching algorithm adapted from Patel Morrison Neural Network Architecture, 2024. Brandon looked up at Maya with new eyes, his tech industry memory finally connecting dots he should have seen months ago. "Patel Morrison," he said slowly. "You're that Patel? The Stanford PhD who developed the neural network that James Morrison published last year." Maya's expression confirmed what Brandon had already guessed, and suddenly he understood why a Stanford PhD was fetching his coffee and wearing Target blazers. He stole your research, Brandon said, and it wasn't questioned. Maya nodded, her jaw tight with old anger, and explained briefly how 3 years of her doctoral work had been published under Morrison's name, how lawyers had told her she couldn't prove theft, how she'd taken a TechCore internship because she'd run out of options and needed investors to believe in her own startup. Stephanie's eyes gleamed with the predatory intelligence that had made her successful in venture capital, and she stepped closer to Maya with false warmth. "That's a terrible story," she said, laying a hand on Maya's shoulder that felt more like ownership than sympathy. "But you wrote this code on TechCore's computers during your internship, which means legally it belongs to the company. That's standard in every employment contract." Maya shook her head and pointed to the laptop she brought from home, the old MacBook covered in Stanford stickers that clearly wasn't TechCore property. "I wrote everything on my personal laptop, on my own time, in my apartment in Oakland. I never touched TechCore systems except to access Brandon's calendar." She pulled up timestamps on her files that proved every line of code had been written between midnight and 5 a.m., saved to her personal Google Drive, backed up on her own USB drives. Brandon sat back in his chair, his mind spinning through the implications while his board meeting waited on video conference. This intern, this woman he'd treated like furniture for 3 months, had built the solution to his $500 million disaster. She'd watched him humiliate her, dismiss her credentials, and reduce her to a coffee runner, and she'd spent her nights building the technology that could save his company anyway. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, genuinely confused by her motivation. "After how I've treated you, why not just take this to a competitor or start your own company?" Maya's answer was simple and devastating. "Because it's the right thing to do. Your demo failed because your technology is broken and I can fix it. That's what engineers do. We solve problems." The board meeting was rescheduled for the next morning because Brandon Liu had just discovered that the most valuable person at TechCore had been living in his blind spot for 3 months, and everything he thought he knew about his company and himself had just been revealed as a carefully constructed illusion. Stephanie was already on her phone calculating equity percentages and contract terms, while Maya stood in Brandon's office wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life by trusting the man who'd spent 3 months proving he didn't deserve her trust. Outside the windows, San Francisco's lights glittered against the darkening sky, and somewhere in that city Professor James Morrison was probably celebrating another consulting deal built on Maya's stolen research, completely unaware that his former student was about to change the entire AI industry from the intern room, where everyone had dismissed her as nobody. The TechCore conference room at 8 a.m. the next morning looked like the war room it had become, with Brandon's executive team arranged around the table and Maya sitting alone near the door like a prisoner awaiting judgment. She'd barely slept, had worn her best blazer, still from Target, and carried her laptop with her algorithm backed up in 3 different locations because trust was something she'd learned not to give easily. Brandon arrived last, his usual arrogance replaced by a focused intensity that made everyone sit straighter, and he started the meeting by projecting Maya's algorithm demonstration on the main screen. "This is what we're going to build," he said without preamble. "Maya's neural network architecture is 3 years ahead of anything our competition has, and solves every problem that destroyed our demo yesterday. We have 6 weeks to integrate it into our product and relaunch at the AI Summit in Las Vegas." The CTO looked like someone had just handed him a life preserver after watching him drown, leaning forward to study the code architecture with the hunger of an engineer who recognized genuine breakthrough when he saw it. "This is incredible," he breathed, scrolling through Maya's documentation. "The context switching alone would take our team 6 months to develop, and she's already solved it." The other executives murmured agreement and started asking technical questions that Maya answered with increasing confidence, her voice steady as she explained processing speeds and training data requirements. Brandon watched her command the room with the same competence he'd dismissed for 3 months, feeling shame twist in his gut alongside the calculating awareness that she'd just saved his company. Stephanie sat in the corner wearing a cream Roland Murray dress and an expression that suggested she was planning something nobody else had considered yet. The meeting ran until noon as Maya walked the engineering team through integration requirements and Brandon made calls to investors promising a revolutionary product relaunch. By 1 p.m., a formal offer had been drafted, Maya would join TechCore as senior AI architect with a $250,000 salary and 0.5% equity, reporting directly to the CTO. She'd lead the integration of her algorithm while maintaining her internship status through the semester to satisfy Stanford's program requirements. Brandon presented the offer himself, sliding the contract across the conference table with something that might have been respect flickering in his dark eyes. "This is more than fair," he said, "considering you be joining mid-project." Maya read through the contract carefully, her Stanford legal courses serving her well, and noticed immediately what they hoped she'd miss: the intellectual property clause that assigned all her existing code to TechCore the moment she signed. "I need to modify Section 7, Maya said, her pen hovering over the signature line while everyone in the room tensed. "My algorithm was developed independently before this employment began. I'll license to the TechCore exclusively for 5 years, but I retain ownership." Brandon's jaw tightened because he'd hoped she wouldn't catch that clause, but Stephanie's voice cut through the room before he could respond. "That's not how this works. You're an employee. Your work belongs to the company." Maya met Stephanie's hostile gaze with calm determination and replied, "I'm not an employee yet. Right now I'm an intern who developed independent technology on her own time, and you're asking to use it. Either we modify the contract, or I take my algorithm to Google." The threat hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled, and Brandon realized with grudging admiration that the woman he'd underestimated for 3 months had just outmaneuvered his girlfriend's venture capital experience. They broke for lunch while legal teams reviewed the modification, and Maya found herself alone in the conference room with her cold Chipotle bowl and her racing thoughts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Heard your voice on the news clips about TechCore. So proud of you, Beta." She smiled because he didn't understand that she'd been invisible in those clips, just another face in the crowd. But maybe that was changing now. Stephanie returned at 1:30 p.m. without Brandon, closing the conference room door with deliberate care, and Maya felt her instincts scream danger. "You're very clever," Stephanie said, sitting across from Maya with false friendliness. "Stanford Ph.D., brilliant code, perfect timing to save Brandon's disaster. But let me be very clear about something. I've spent 5 years building Brandon into a billion-dollar founder, and I'm not going to let some intern threaten that investment." Maya's hands tightened around her laptop because Stephanie's mask had finally dropped, revealing the predator underneath the Chanel suits and venture capital polish. "I'm not threatening anything," Maya said carefully. "I'm offering to help TechCore," but Stephanie cut her off with a laugh that had no humor in it. "You're offering to make yourself indispensable, which gives you leverage Brandon's too distracted to see right now. But I see it, Maya. I see exactly what you're doing, and I want you to know that I have lawyers who specialize in destroying people who try to manipulate my portfolio companies." The threat was explicit now, and Maya felt a familiar weight of being dismissed and attacked for daring to be competent. "I built that algorithm in my apartment," she said, her voice harder now. "Every timestamp proves I own it, and if you try to steal it like Professor Morrison did, I'll take this story to every tech reporter in San Francisco." Stephanie's expression went cold and calculating, and she pulled out her phone to show Maya something that made her blood freeze. It was a photo of Maya's apartment building, taken that morning, with a timestamp showing Stephanie's team had already been investigating her. "Your visa status is interesting," Stephanie said conversationally. "Your OPT expires in 4 months, and you'll need employer sponsorship to stay in the country. TechCore could sponsor you, or we could make a call to immigration questioning whether your internship violated the terms of your student visa by doing unauthorized work." Maya felt panic and rage war in her chest because Stephanie had just weaponized her immigrant status, the exact kind of threat people had used against her family her entire life. "That's illegal," Maya said, her voice shaking. "And you know it." Stephanie smiled and replied, "Prove it. I'm a venture capitalist giving employment advice to an intern. That's not illegal. That's just business." Brandon returned at 2 p.m. with a modified contract approved by legal, completely unaware of the threat his girlfriend had just delivered, and Maya signed with hands that shook from anger rather than fear. The rest of the afternoon passed in technical discussions about integration timelines, and by 5 p.m. Maya had been moved from the intern room to a real office on the 7th floor with actual windows and a door that locked. The other interns watched with barely concealed jealousy as she packed up her desk, Tyler muttering something about teacher's pet that Maya ignored because she had bigger problems now. She worked until 10 p.m. with the engineering team reviewing code, and when she finally left the building, she found her car had been towed from the TechCore parking lot. Street cleaning, the notice said, though she'd been parked legally that morning. The Uber home cost $45 she couldn't afford, and Maya spent the ride reviewing everything that had happened with the clear-eyed awareness that Stephanie Chun had just declared war. She'd saved TechCore from disaster, negotiated a contract that protected her intellectual property, and finally received recognition for her brilliance. But she'd also made a powerful enemy who had resources Maya couldn't match and no moral constraints about using them. Her apartment building looked especially dingy after a day in TechCore's sleek offices, and Maya climbed the stairs to her studio thinking about how quickly success could turn into a different kind of trap. Her laptop showed 17 unread emails from engineering, but Maya ignored them and pulled up her backup files instead, copying her algorithm to 3 more USB drives because paranoia had become practical. She fell asleep at midnight with her laptop still running, her algorithm processing test data in the background like a digital heartbeat, proving she existed and mattered despite everyone who tried to make her disappear. Somewhere in Pacific Heights, Brandon Liu was probably celebrating with Stephanie, drinking expensive wine, and planning TechCore's triumphant comeback, completely unaware that his girlfriend had already started the process of destroying the woman who'd saved his company. And in a woodside mansion, Professor James Morrison was asleep in his guest bedroom, his reputation built on Maya's stolen research still secure, still unchallenged, still benefiting from the brilliant work he claimed as his own. Maya dreamed about standing on a stage, not as an intern, not as someone's assistant, but as herself, and waking up at 5 a.m. to the reality that she had 6 weeks to make that dream real or watch Stephanie Chun destroy everything she'd built. The integration of Maya's algorithm into TechCore's product consumed the next 3 weeks in a blur of 18-hour days, technical challenges, and constant amazement from engineers who'd never seen code this elegant work this efficiently. Maya worked alongside Brandon's team reviewing architecture decisions and debugging integration issues, her Stanford training finally put to use in ways that made the past 3 months of coffee runs feel like a punishment she'd somehow survived. She moved through TechCore's offices differently now. Engineers sought her opinion. Executives invited her to strategy meetings, and even the receptionist learned her name, but the hostile weight of Stephanie's attention never lifted. Whenever Maya entered a room where Stephanie was present, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, and she'd catch the VC examining her like a surgeon identifying where to cut for maximum damage. Brandon himself had transformed from dismissive boss to genuinely interested colleague, staying late to review code with Maya and asking questions that showed he was actually trying to understand her work rather than just exploit it. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, Maya explaining neural network architecture while Brandon paced his office running through business implications, both of them fueled by takeout from every restaurant within delivery range and the shared awareness that they were building something genuinely revolutionary. One night at 2 a.m., while debugging a processing speed issue, Brandon looked up from his laptop and said, "I'm sorry." Maya kept typing, assuming he meant the bug they'd just found, but he continued, "For how I treated you these past months. I didn't see you, and that's inexcusable." Maya's fingers stilled on the keyboard, and she met his eyes, seeing genuine remorse there for the first time. "You saw an intern," she said quietly. "That's what I was." But Brandon shook his head and leaned back in his chair, his careful founder persona cracking to show exhaustion underneath. "I saw what I wanted to see. Someone to fetch my coffee and validate my importance. Because, God forbid, I actually have to treat people like equals." He pulled up his phone and showed Maya something that made her breath catch. It was a TechCrunch article about his failed demo, the comments section filled with mockery about his arrogance and schadenfreude about his public failure. "I built this whole company on being smarter than everyone else," Brandon said, "and it turns out I'm just better at being an asshole. You saved me, Maya. You saved my company and my reputation, and I didn't even know I needed saving until it was almost too late." Maya didn't know how to respond to this vulnerable Brandon who'd replaced the arrogant CEO, so she just went back to typing and said, "Your coffee order is still oat milk, right?" The AI summit in Las Vegas was scheduled for 3 weeks away, and TechCore's relaunch demo was positioned as the event's keynote, a chant for Brandon to redeem his TechCrunch disaster in front of 5,000 attendees and the global tech press. Maya's algorithm was fully integrated now, running on production servers and processing user queries with a flawless efficiency she designed into its architecture. They spent a week rehearsing the demo, real this time, no pre-scripted responses or backup systems, with Maya watching from backstage while Brandon worked through complex questions that the AI handled perfectly. Watching him present her work with full attribution, hearing him say developed by senior AI architect Dr. Maya Patel, instead of claiming credit himself, felt like vindication for every humiliation she'd endured. She'd gone from coffee girl to credited innovator in less than a month, and the tech press was already calling her the Stanford genius who saved TechCore. But Stephanie Chen had not been idle during those 3 weeks, and Maya started noticing small attacks that felt coordinated and deliberate. Her building's landlord suddenly required employment verification and threatened eviction proceedings, claiming her internship didn't constitute stable employment despite her new senior architect title. Her student visa paperwork, which should have been routine renewal, was flagged by immigration for additional review, requiring expensive lawyer consultations Maya couldn't afford. Someone leaked her personal email to a tech gossip blog that ran a blind item about a mysterious Stanford PhD with sketchy credentials working at TechCore, complete with implications that she'd fabricated her background. Maya traced each attack back to anonymous sources, but the pattern was clear. Stephanie was systematically undermining her credibility and stability, careful to leave no direct evidence. The confrontation came 2 weeks before the Vegas demo, when Maya found Stephanie waiting in her new office at 8 p.m. with the door closed and an expression that promised violence. "You're still here," Stephanie said, not bothering with pleasantries anymore. "I gave you several opportunities to leave quietly, to take your algorithm, cash out, and disappear back to whatever immigrant story you came from. But you stayed, and now you're a problem." Maya felt anger override caution, and she stood up from her desk, done with being intimidated by people who thought wealth excused cruelty. "I stayed because Brandon asked me to stay, and because I built something that deserves to exist in the world. If that threatens you, maybe you should examine your own insecurities." Stephanie's laugh was genuinely amused this time, and she pulled out her phone to show Maya documents that made her stomach drop. The documents were patent applications for Maya's algorithm architecture, filed 3 weeks ago under James Morrison's name. Morrison had somehow obtained Maya's code, probably through legal means but impossible to prove, and was claiming he'd invented the neural network approach that Maya had spent years developing. "Your former advisor is very interested in this technology," Stephanie said, enjoying Maya's shock. "I reached out to him after our first conversation, just to verify your credentials, and it turns out he has some concerns about your claims of independent development. He thinks this algorithm might actually be derived from his original research, the research he published last year that you claim he stole from you." Maya felt the familiar trap closing around her, the same pattern of powerful people stealing her work and then accusing her of theft, and rage burned through her fear. "You can't do this," she said. "The timestamps prove I wrote this code months after Morrison published his paper." Stephanie shrugged and put her phone away, completely unconcerned with concepts like truth or justice. Timestamps can be manipulated. Patent applications are expensive to contest, especially for someone with your limited resources. And Morrison has Stanford's legal team behind him, while you have... She looked around Maya's modest office with exaggerated concern. "What exactly?" "A Target blazer and a TechCore email address." Maya's hands clenched into fists because she wanted to hit something, to destroy the smug confidence on Stephanie's face. But violence wouldn't solve problems that required evidence and strategy. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "What did I do to you?" Stephanie's answer was simple and devastating. "You made Brandon see you as something other than beneath him. That makes you competition, and I eliminate competition." The truth landed like a physical blow because Maya finally understood. This wasn't about algorithms or patents or business strategy. This was about Stephanie's fear that Brandon might value Maya's competence more than Stephanie's connections, that the intern who'd save his company might threaten the girlfriend who'd spent 5 years maintaining control. "You're afraid he'll leave you," Maya said, and Stephanie's expression confirmed the guess. "I'm afraid of nothing," Stephanie replied coldly. but I am proactive about protecting my investments, and Brandon Liu is my most valuable portfolio asset. You can have your algorithm and your credit in your little office, but you will never have him. The moment you try, I will destroy you so thoroughly that you'll wish you stayed in that intern room where you belonged. Maya stood alone in her office after Stephanie left, her hands shaking as she reviewed the patent applications and tried to calculate how much Morrison's legal challenge would cost to fight. The answer was somewhere between impossible and devastating. Stanford's lawyers would bury her in discovery requests and motions, draining what little money she had while TechCore's launch proceeded with technologies she couldn't legally claim as her own. She pulled up her backup files and started documenting everything: timestamps, development notes, correspondence with Brandon, building a paper trail that might save her if this turned into an actual legal battle. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Still at office? Want to grab late dinner and review Vegas demo." She stared at the message and thought about Stephanie's threat, then texted back. "Can't tonight. Family emergency." She worked until 3 a.m. building her defense case, organizing evidence and researching patent law with a desperate focus of someone who'd already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. Morrison's patent application was carefully worded to claim priority dating back to Maya's Stanford research, suggesting he'd been developing the approach for years while Maya had only recently implemented it. It was a lie built on lies, protected by institutional power and venture capital money, but it was a lie that could work unless Maya found a way to prove the truth publicly. Her algorithm ran in the background processing test data, the elegant code she built during lonely nights in Oakland now powering TechCore's revolutionary product, and Maya wondered if brilliance was always as vulnerable to people who valued ownership over innovation. She fell asleep at her desk and woke to find Brandon standing in her doorway at 7 a.m. with coffee and a concerned expression, and for a moment Maya felt something dangerous flutter in her chest before she remembered Stephanie's threat. "You look terrible," Brandon said with uncharacteristic gentleness. "What's wrong?" Maya almost told him everything about Stephanie's intimidation, Morrison's patent theft, the coordinated attacks designed to make her give up. But she looked at this man who'd spent 5 years with Stephanie Chen and wondered if he believed his girlfriend capable of such calculated cruelty. "Just tired," she lied, accepting the coffee. "The Vegas demo is in 2 weeks, and I want everything perfect." Brandon studied her like he was trying to read code he didn't quite understand, then nodded and said, "We'll be perfect because you're brilliant, and the world is about to find out." The AI Summit in Las Vegas placed TechCore's keynote in the prime 2 p.m. slot, and Maya arrived early with the engineering team, while Brandon and Stephanie flew separately in his jet. Though housed modestly, Maya focused on perfecting her algorithm, which performed flawlessly in testing, giving her cautious hope that her work would finally be recognized. On the morning of the keynote, Maya was summoned to Brandon's suite to find lawyers and executives in crisis. Morrison had filed an emergency injunction claiming her algorithm violated his patents, blocking its public demonstration. The lawyers warned that fighting it could take years and freeze TechCore's product. As Brandon apologized, Maya produced detailed proof, timestamps, notes, and code histories, showing she had built the system herself. Stephanie dismissed it, pointing out that a legal battle would still cripple the company, and Maya realized the truth. She accused Stephanie of feeding Morrison the information needed to sabotage the launch. When Maya presented emails, call logs, and a damning text about removing the intern problem, the lawyers immediately recognized it as potential corporate sabotage. Brandon turned on Stephanie, demanding the truth. Her composure shattered as she admitted she'd done it, furious that Maya had shifted Brandon's loyalty and threatened her control. She sneered that Maya was just an intern who wrote some code, revealing how far she would go to protect her power, even if it meant destroying both Maya and TechCore. The room went silent, and Maya watched Brandon process what his girlfriend had just admitted, that she'd sabotaged his company's biggest product launch because her ego couldn't handle competition from someone she dismissed as beneath her. "You destroyed our keynote," Brandon said slowly, "destroyed Maya's reputation, and potentially cost TechCore millions in lost valuation. Because you were jealous?" Stephanie laughed without humor and grabbed her Hermes bag from the couch. "I was protecting my investment. That's what VCs do. We eliminate risks and protect returns. She was a risk, and I eliminated her." She headed toward the door, but Brandon's next word stopped her cold. I'm calling the board. Right now. And I'm recommending we terminate our relationship with your VC firm for attempted corporate sabotage. What happened next moved with the swift brutality of Silicon Valley justice, where reputation mattered more than truth and scandal spread faster than any algorithm could process. Brandon called an emergency board meeting via video conference while Maya and the lawyers documented everything Stephanie had admitted. The board reviewed the evidence. Stephanie's contact with Morrison, the coordinated timing of the injunction, her own admission of sabotage, and made a decision within 30 minutes. Recommend full cooperation with any investigation and immediate termination of all business relationships with Stephanie's VC firm. TechCore's general counsel contacted Morrison's lawyers with new evidence showing Stephanie had provided him with confidential information in potential violation of corporate espionage laws, giving Morrison a choice: withdraw the injunction or face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Morrison dropped the injunction just 45 minutes before the keynote, his lawyer's hollow excuse fooling no one. Stephanie stormed out as her firm turned against her, and Maya felt only exhaustion. Brandon apologized again, this time with real regret in his eyes. But Maya stopped him. We have a keynote in 30 minutes. Let's show the world what we built. The walk to the ballroom felt unreal. 5,000 people waited as Maya took her place backstage, encouraged by a message from her father watching the live stream from his gas station. Brandon opened the keynote by admitting his past failure and how he'd learned to value engineering over ego, then revealed Maya's elegant AI system and acknowledged a woman he'd once overlooked. The demo was flawless. The AI answered everything with remarkable intelligence, stunning the audience. When Brandon brought Maya on stage, she was introduced as the Stanford PhD behind the breakthrough, and her explanation of the system earned a standing ovation from a crowd that was finally seeing her brilliance. The AI Summit keynote turned Maya from an anonymous intern into an industry star overnight, with TechCore stocks surging and her promotion to CTO securing both wealth and permanent immigration status. She moved into a real apartment, finally free from vulnerability, just as Brandon unexpectedly arrived one evening with takeout and a confession of love. Though she hesitated because of their professional roles, he insisted they were now equals, partners in both business and innovation, and admitted that through her brilliance and persistence, he had fallen in love with a woman he once underestimated. Their relationship grew quietly before becoming public after Fortune feature declared them a tech power couple. 6 months later, they married at the Computer History Museum. Her immigrant parents honored in the front row, while Stephanie Chin was excluded after losing her career to a corporate espionage scandal. Maya's algorithm became the global standard for conversational AI, making her independently wealthy and turning TechCore into a multi-billion-dollar empire under their joint leadership. They built a life of stability and purpose, keeping reminders of how far she had risen from the intern desk where she'd once been invisible. When Maya announced her pregnancy, the world celebrated the woman who had gone from coffee runs to CTO. Their son, Dev, became a living symbol of everything she had overcome, and she brought him into the halls where she'd once been ignored, now greeted as a leader. Her parents retired comfortably, and her brother followed her into engineering, inspired by her example. Wealth came, but so did justice, as Maya funded scholarships and fought back against those who had once stolen from her. On Dev's first birthday, Maya stood in TechCore's offices watching the city glow, remembering the girl who had carried revolutionary code through humiliation and doubt until the world finally caught up to her. She knew now that brilliance didn't need permission, it only needed resilience. As her algorithm continued to transform the industry, Maya returned to her laptop, ready to build the future, determined never to forget the intern still waiting to be seen.